be available. I'd also like to mention that this webinar is a lead-up activity to the SESI conference, the Comparative Education Society of India conference, which will be held from 9th to 11th December. There's a kind of run-up to that conference. The theme of the conference is Educational Transformations, Crisis and Resilience. Now, I would also urge you to learn more about the conference and to participate in it, and to take interest in the activities of SESI, and also this particular expert group, which is focusing on IT in the use of digital technologies in schools. Again, I'd request Guru and his colleagues to post some information about the different ways in which one can participate in this special interest group. I'd request them to post it on the chat so that's available to all. Let me now briefly introduce the speaker and the discussant. The speaker is also the author of the report. He will be making a presentation today. Professor Rajaram Sharma has a master's degree in chemistry, a B.Ed, M.Ed and PhD in education. And as you can imagine, he has had a long career of over 3 decades. He has been a teacher educator, trainer and researcher. He was in the NCERT for 20 years. He retired as the joint director of the CIET, the Central Institute of Educational Technology, which is a sort of main institution for this field of educational technology, housed in the NCERT, Delhi. He has led initiatives in the application of ICT in education, beginning from the age of radio and television, going through the whole gamut of technologies, audio and video, web, interactive multimedia applications, and so on. He was closely involved in the implementation of the national policy of ICT in school education. He was involved in the development of a national repository of open education resources, as well as an ICT in education curriculum. There are many other initiatives he has been a part of or he has started himself, such as the rollout of ePathshala, a web and mobile interface that provides access to digital versions of textbooks, and the very broad platform which is known as Swayam, which offers the MOOC, massive online courses initiative, which has, I think, a whole lot of school online courses in school education. So we will look forward to his presentation, and let me not stand in the way, but before he does that, let me also introduce our discussant. Sadakat Mullah is an ed tech practitioner and researcher. He teaches ICT and new media in education. New media and education. These are courses that he teaches at the Center of Excellence in Teacher Education, or CET, in the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Recently, he co-authored South Asia Background Research Study on digital content for the upcoming 2023 UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report. So he's also well versed in this field, and I'm sure we will have a very interesting presentation followed by a discussion. Roughly the schedule is that we will now move on to a talk by the speaker, Professor Rajaram. He will make a presentation in 2 parts. The first half an hour, after that we will stop, take questions which will be led by the discussant, and there can also be questions from the audience. Then we move to the second part of the presentation, again by Professor Rajaram Sharma, and followed by questions from Sadakat as well as from the audience. And then we will close with a few remarks by me at the end. So if the technology is all in place, now can I invite Guru, can I invite Professor Rajaram Sharma?
Yes, his slides are already on. I will move the slides so Rajaram can begin.
So over to you, Professor Rajaram.
Thank you very much, Ravi, and I'm quite happy that after almost about a year of grappling with this idea of education technology, we were able to put together some coherent ideas. And as a person who looked at it from the outside, the comments that Ravi made gives me the kind of a satisfaction that I have made the points that I was attempting to make. We will actually be developing some of these issues a little more elaborately now. but many of those issues which concern the larger system of education, what the SCERTs or the NCERT or the new education policy drivers can look at in terms of technology, are there in the report. We will not be dwelling on them. So I sort of restrict myself to classrooms, I restrict myself to schools, and of course, it's equally applicable to higher education, but typically looked at from the point of view of a teacher and a group of learners sitting together and engaging with the possibilities of education technology. Now, as Ravi mentioned, some of us who have been engaged with this idea of education technology for through its historical developments have noted that it is perhaps as old as classrooms. When you say that I have something called a timetable, I have structured the time available to me in terms of slots, and I will do science now, I'll do maths now, I'll do history now, and so on. I'm actually using a technology device to optimize the amount of time that is available for each of the subjects. When I say I want to use a blackboard, I want to use colored chalk, I want to draw a diagram on that, I want to draw a graph and explain something, I'm invoking a technology device to do so. So looked at from that perspective, teacher herself perhaps should be considered as a technology device, which is enabling this learner to engage with this larger world of knowledge, pick up the abilities that this teacher is able to demonstrate, is able to place before the child, is able to help the child explore. So we treat education technology as a much larger interface. Of course, teachers have not ever looked at it from that perspective because they have always said, okay, fine, if you're going to give me one new device that becomes a part of my life, I'm continuing to use it. And therefore, I don't consider it to be something different, something, to be called by a distinct name. However, with the advent of digital technologies, with a large number of wires getting into the classes, a large number of visual devices getting into the classes, it has become fashionable to treat ET as if it is a distinct intervention. In a way, perhaps it is valid because digital technologies have grown to a point where it is no more restricted to only classrooms. It can do a much larger variety of things which can have influence on teaching learning. It can function even without these classrooms being in place. And therefore, perhaps when we now talk of education technology, at least that subset which could be called as information and communication technologies or digital technologies should be treated with a slightly different lens, with a slightly different filter, because it has implications which go much beyond the teaching learning processes that were earlier part of our definition of education technology. And also, we now use education technology or the digital technologies part of education technology in association with a variety of hardware and software. Now, the implications of this would be what would be our context. Guru, I'm sorry, I did not ask you to go into the next slide, but perhaps now that I have covered the slide, you could go on to the next one again. Please go on to the next slide. Yeah. So if we now therefore try and visualize what is it that we would like to gain from infusing technology into classrooms or make technologies available to the teacher, we need to look at it from many different perspectives. One of this being, if the teacher is the controller of that technology, and I use the model of the mouse here, saying that if the teacher is handling the mouse, if the teacher is controlling the device, if the teacher is deciding which parts of the technology will be used at what points in time and so on, what is it that I should expect technology to deliver? Amongst the first things that it must do is that it must enhance their ability to teach. And this is a point that we will try and expand on a little later also. The reason why this becomes very significant is that in the hands of the teacher, it can help the teacher teach better, and it does not necessarily become a as a corollary, we shouldn't try to infer that learning becomes better because of this. And we'll revisit this idea a little more in detail. But nevertheless, in the hands of the teacher, it should make it easier for them to work. It should make their life far more efficient. There must be lots of material that she would otherwise have spent enormous time inside the classroom trying to configure, trying to bring together, trying to use in the classroom. If all of these can be pre-packaged by her or by others, then it makes her life simpler. It makes it more efficient in terms of the usage of time and effort within the classroom. But there is always a desire that it should make teaching more effective. And if that does not happen, then perhaps we should start questioning the technology itself or the way the technology was pushed into the total process of teaching. Nevertheless, our expectations from the teacher's point of view would be that it should enhance teaching and it should make it more efficient and more effective. Next slide, please. But instead, if we hand over the control to the student, that is, you imagine a kind of a group of computers being placed in some location and children having direct access to these devices. That is, they are working on their own, structured, unstructured, guided, unguided. That is a matter of detail. But essentially, the student is taking a call on what is it that I want to do with this technology. And if that happens, and if it can happen over a sustained period of time, if children can use that to learn the device itself and the possibilities that the device offers, what they are going to end up with is that they would have learned to explore the world. The World Wide Web, all of us are so fond of saying that it opens out the world to the child. At least the number of sources of information, the different perspectives that it can bring in, and the opening out of possibilities which go much, much beyond the syllabi, the textbook, the typical confines of what happens in classrooms. If the child is allowed to explore on its own, then perhaps the different interests of different children can lead them to different openings, different explorations, different information, which can then allow them to use that to support their own learning. So perhaps there is so much more science there, so much more social science there, so much more language there to be acquired, to be accessed and used to support their own learning. So one of the goals of education technology in the hands of the student would be that the student actually becomes better at learning whatever it is that they are learning. And if thereby their interest, their ability to explore such things becomes more acute, they perhaps will be able to make better choices for their education because they have seen the world now, seen at least a small portion of the world which catches their interest, and they are able to say, all right, this is what I would like to pursue in education, higher education, or perhaps even make this a part of my career. So now, typically, if you compare this with the previous argument that we made of the mouse being in the hands of the teacher, it supports teaching there. It supports the purpose that the teacher had, which typically would be that of the syllabi, that of the subjects that she is teaching, that of enriching, embellishing, making it more efficient and more effective in terms of teaching. But here is a possibility where you allow children to explore it on their own, and they are able to do much more with this. And this was the point that I was trying to argue, that while in the hands of the teacher, it might support and it might make teaching more effective, in the hands of the student, it possibly can make learning far more effective. And this is something that I would request all of you to dwell on a little more, because this has implications for how we would like to configure technology, which we'll come to in a while. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, there are a large number of us people who have, are at least no more in the classrooms or have roles in the society which are distinct from the teacher in the classroom. These could be people who are in the state system of education, who are NGOs working with education technology, who could be developers of various kinds of software applications. It could be anyone else who wants to influence this infusion of education technology. What is it that their expectation should be? Now, I would urge that you, as this outsider, should actually help redefine the ET environment. One of the major handicaps of this, the way education technology has grown, is that newer and newer people get into technology at a different point in time and are influenced by a different set of devices, a different set of hardware, software, a different set of possibilities. And they tend to, because they have been introduced to it at a different point in time, get either locked into that or look at the world of education only from that perspective. And hence, to try and redefine this ET environment so that it starts serving a much larger purpose, which I call reimagining teaching and reimagining education. This is possible, and it's only some of us who are in the outside this classroom system who are actually in a better position to help out, because we are not constrained by, we are not locked by the typical routines of a classroom, timetable, syllabi, completion of the syllabi, taking them through examinations, teaching examinations, and so on. So in a way, we should be able to help figure out which technologies work, how they should be put together, and how they should be brought to the notice of the system, so that ET environments start helping, equipping teachers with the know-how to reimagine teaching. Another issue connected with this, which all of us who were outside and who were involved in training of teachers, who were, we were very impressed with the possibilities of ET. We wanted everybody else to follow this, everybody else to try and experience the possibilities. And somehow the very technology became a kind of a big hill which had to be climbed. And therefore, our emphasis started, or our attention started getting distracted by the complexity of the technology itself. So enormous number of us have been involved in helping teachers learn the technology, learn how to use particular software, learn how to use particular devices, how to set up these devices, and how to make them, usable in the class. The amount of effort that we put into all of that somehow distracted us away from the core possibility that it should actually have made teaching more effective. And making teaching more effective is not a matter of throwing in the right kind of software and hardware, but trying to reimagine teaching in the context of those hardware, software, and the possibilities that they have. So you should be able to work it out if you look at the typical effort that people put in to make PowerPoint presentations. If you look at the effort and look at what the impact of that is and what an individual teacher was able to actually milk this technology for, you would realize that perhaps that wasn't the best way of leveraging technology. And this is the effort that I believe all of us have a responsibility towards, and all of us should try and help out. And also, the larger school system has not been able to reimagine education from this context. So if you look at the textbooks, for instance, today, nowhere does it even pretend to believe that technology exists. There are, of course, newfangled small artifacts which have started emerging in textbooks where, at the end of the exercise, there is a little link saying you go and look up this YouTube video, or there is a little QR code from which you can access a few multiple choice questions and things like that. But those are the very trivial ways in which we are looking at it. So if the school system itself were to reimagine education, making an assumption that these technologies are available, then they would look at education completely differently. And that is very essential for us to help the school system look at infusion of education technology. And the last aspect here, which all of us have almost a duty towards, is that there is very, very scant research and insights drawn from that research on what works. There are enough number of surveys, there are enough number of, particular, almost anecdotal studies on what works. But then because there isn't anything called a standard online course or a standard multimedia package or a standard way in which science can be supported or maths can be supported, we do not yet have a good body of research from which we can draw an inference that it is essential for us to put in education technology of this kind into the classroom and help the teacher in the following manner. I think we need to work towards that kind of a goal. Can I have the next slide, please? I'll hold this. I'll just request all of you to have a look at this, but then we will stop at this stage and seek questions. And I request Sadakat to take over.
Thank you so much, Professor Rajaram. Request all the participants to put in your questions in the chat box so we can collate them, and if possible we can allow some questions to be asked also. Rajaram, you pointed very vividly about what happens when the technology comes in the hands of teachers or in the hands of students. So I was thinking about the agency aspect. So 3 questions really relating to that comes to my mind. With the introduction of technology, does the agency change of teacher and student? And B, how can we ensure that it flourishes with the use of technology? And C, when does technology become intruding in the teaching learning process? It becomes distracting, and when does it inhibit the agency? If you could shed more light about that.
Yeah. Can I take it on right now, or?
Yeah, I think if you could elaborate a bit on the agency.
Now, when we refer to this word agency, we are basically looking at how an individual, first of all, seeks technology and tries to incorporate it as a part of their practice, whatever that is. So if we typically take a classroom, the global picture that a teacher has of what she should be doing inside that classroom is sort of well defined. You know, it has over a period of time, good or bad. I mean, we will not get into that argument right now. But essentially, the teacher sees her role as somebody who is going to help mediate some part of that textbook, some part of that syllabi to be transacted in such a manner that children are going to acquire some information, some knowledge, some skills, and so on. So when the teacher seeks technology, she seeks technology to further this agenda. And therefore, there are only particular ways in which that technology comes in handy. So typically, if you look at the evolution of the projector, the multimedia projector raising itself into those touchscreen-based smart boards or whatever, these were extensions of the blackboard. So in a way, if you look at the teacher's practice has not at all been influenced by this. The teacher's practice has become more colorful. The teacher's practice has perhaps become a little more involved. She's zooming something, or she's clicking something here, and then she's invoking some screen which did not exist there. These are artifacts of that. What is the packaged information which was lying underneath? That has not changed. That continues to be the same thing. And except in a few cases where somebody else has, endeavored to try and bring about changes in that, more or less it is trying to perpetuate the existing ways in which we go about teaching, which, as I'll perhaps revisit this issue later on in the next part of this talk, that perhaps it comes in the way of education, because it is not doing the role that it ought to have done with all this complexity, with all this extra effort, with all this extra investments. I would have expected my classrooms to transform. And when I say transform, what am I looking at? I am looking at learning becoming more holistic. Things that were not possible earlier with the teacher just transacting information, if the teacher just using existing means of communication, there was information that the child got, and perhaps with all the problems or exercises or whatever else that the teacher managed to bring into that class, had an opportunity to play with that information and construct some amount of knowledge. Which is the reason why I believe that if there existed a lab-like environment which existed outside this classroom confine, where I'm not really teaching science, but I'm using science as a way in which children will go about exploring something all on their own. And on their own, I think, is a little hyped statement here. It could be a structured environment. It could be that it's a teacher-guided exploration of the web. But basically what we are looking at here is that the children are acquiring knowledge which goes much, much beyond what was conceived of or what can be transacted by the teacher in the class. And this is where that little shift of agency from the teacher to the student can have a bigger impact. Of course, there will be implications of all of this, and there will be dangers also. There will be possibilities also, which we will explore later on. But this is the way I look at this concept of agency coming in the way of being meaningful or not being meaningful to the transaction within the classrooms. Also, if you look at packaged material becoming available to teachers, and currently the talk of the town is the Diksha platform, for instance. And as an idea, the precursor, the NROER. If they are leveraged as something standard, something that somebody has already defined, it becomes one more glorified textbook. And will bring with it all the ills of the textbook. Now, what is it that the textbook was trying to do? The textbook was trying to tell the teacher, you have no business in trying to articulate this idea on your own. We are going to tell you how to go about doing it. So there is a perpetuation of that idea, which I think is a danger, which we need to be warned ourselves about. Yes, Sudhakar.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are two questions. We'll take the first question later. But Manodhar says that it's really confusing for a teacher to choose which technology to use and where to use in his classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we address that confusion?
Okay. Now, when we position the question in the manner in which this has been placed now, we are assuming that there is unlimited possibilities for the teacher to select, which is not true in 95% of the cases. Because once you bring in, let us say, a computer connected to a projector which is placed in the classroom, there is a large number of possibilities of technology which automatically get ruled out. If we say that the mobile is the only interface that I have with me, it will rule out a large number of activities that can actually be done. So I presume that this question is not about the hardware, not about the device configuration that you have looked at, but about the range of software applications. There you have a lot more freedom. But again, if you say that my own imagination of what I will use technology for is being limited by what YouTube can offer, what some blog sites can offer, what the Swayam platform can offer, then I'm doing the same mistake of trying to restrict myself to some packaged material, in a sense handing over charge to someone else. But if I don't do that, if I reject all of those packaged material and I say I want to be the arbiter of technology, then different kinds of software allow different levels of interaction, which either students or teachers can benefit from. And all of us are very fond of invoking those interactive software packages of, for instance, the GeoGebra that we use in mathematics, or coding itself being a handle of that kind, or graphic software which allows a lot of creative activity, creation of material. And if I try and compare some graphic software like GIMP or Photoshop, and compare that with let us say a PowerPoint presentation, I would any day choose GIMP or Photoshop, because it gives me that blank canvas to work with. I can create what I want to create with it. And then therefore, if I introduce that to my student can create whatever it is that the student wants to create. And that, I think, is a very important goal of technology. The goal of technology is not to say that there exists information there which has to be passed on to the student, but allow the student to be the creator, the arbiter of what information will flow on the stick. Because as a consequence of that, there is a lot of not only personal learning that happens, but also enormous amount of change in the way one goes about learning. And so to me, the best software is a word processor because it gives me a blank page, but then it again, restricts me to only typing. So graphic software is perhaps even better because it allows me to draw. It allows me to do whatever I want with it. And if I therefore extend that logic and get into 3D animation, get into, data analysis, if I get into various other kinds of such packages which don't define what is it that's going to come out of it at the end of it, that would be the best software, best technologies to incorporate into classrooms. Yes, Sadakat.
Thank you. On the page 34 of the report, it is noted that the capacity of teachers to innovate in education and define directions for digital technologies has remained an untapped potential. So I've been wondering how much or can the pre-service teacher trainings and teacher professional development programs really catch up with newer and newer technology developments? Is it really possible? Because technology is continuously developing. So how much is it justifiable to ask teachers to catch up to the technological developments and then at the same time also develop their own professional development in the content knowledge that they've been handling? So how much is too much?
Now, this question could actually have been addressed about mathematics also, about science also. And my father, who studied way back some 50 years ago, had not heard of sets, had not heard of various other topics that I dealt with. And I haven't heard of many of the topics that children today are dealing with. So any knowledge for that matter is going to be a constantly evolving knowledge. The confusion arises because of the nature of that physical device or the physical interface through which this technology starts flowing. So when I say, for instance, today it is so much easier for me to handle a tablet device, and I don't really require a keyboard and a mouse. What I'm missing out here is that these are different technologies. They do different things, they allow different things, and they disallow certain other things. And so therefore, one response to that is to try and enthuse people to start looking at technologies as some kind of a continuum and not really lock themselves into that particular technology. The adaptability, the flexibility, the resilience that I need to have in looking at technology itself, which requires not an exposure to technology, but to the principles of using technology in education. And this is a completely different point altogether. So we shouldn't be looking at preparing teacher educators or for that matter, teachers in the teacher education program as technicians who are going to be operating on particular devices, particular software, particular ways of presenting classes and so on. But alongside, equip them with ways of looking at technology. What can technology do for me in education? How can it open out my own world? How can it open out my child's world? In fact, in the B.Ed classes, for instance, we always had a chapter called curriculum analysis. And we've somehow, over a period of time, diluted it so much that today it doesn't really mean anything. So much so that many of us teachers have come out of the system without even knowing the distinction between curriculum and syllabi and the textbook. So in a way, we have diluted it and handed over charge to that technology device, which enabled somebody to put in a ready-made set of instructional material and masquerade that as education. So we have somehow, stopped ourselves from doing that. So basically, if we can revert back to first principles, if we can treat education technology as all those systems and devices and processes which we can introduce into our classrooms, which can make us efficient, which can make us effective, which can make our teaching deliberate, and which can cause learning, And if I am able to explore this in that larger context, that would be a meaningful intervention for the student of teacher education, which will help that person to be interfacing with any newer technology, ask critical questions of it, and make one's own judgment about, shall I use it, shall I not use it? If I want to use it, what shall I use it for, and how should I use it? Which is what that, the research and insights on what works would be a very useful input into this process.
You have been part of this scheme of ICT National ICT Award for school teachers, right? Which has been since 2010. What have been your observations? Do you see progression in terms of the quality of adoption, innovation done by teachers?
There was a historical need for it at that particular point in time. We had a scheme called the Education Technology Scheme, which was being promoted by the Ministry of Education at the center. And there was enormous investment of equipment, hardware, software, training for teachers, establishing computer labs in the schools, and so on. And alongside, there were a large number of other players who were trying to get into teacher training, getting into defining what can be possible out of technology and so on. So it was in that context that this was used more to sort of, help people understand what technology can do and how classrooms could be transformed and so on. But like any other scheme, what happens is that it becomes a victim of its own methods. And one of those things that has happened is, thanks to the overstructuring of this whole thing, there is somebody who's being selected for something and he's being brought in. But let us say that I have awarded somebody as a very innovative user of technology. What happens apart from the fact that that chap carries back a certificate and goes around maybe being felicitated in a couple of forums? There is no input from that person's insights, that person's exploration. Those things don't become mainstream. Those things never get back into the school system and try to transform the larger school system. So awards perhaps may not be equipped to handle this larger transformation issue. And that is indeed a limitation. But for those individuals who did get awarded, perhaps we have not had a chance to go back and speak to them and find out, what have you therefore now become? Have you managed to transform your classrooms? Do you continue to be an explorer of technology? Has your perspectives on technology changed today? I don't know, at least I personally do not know of any such documentation, but that could be a useful way of looking at it. But certainly what these people on their own endeavored, and many of the awardees did not wait for the state system to provide them the means to do so. They explored things on their own. They went around begging, borrowing, stealing, putting things together, trying out various things, innovating on their own, interfacing with that larger world and bringing back technological means of enriching their classrooms. They went out of their way. Now, if in some ways I am able to abstract that out and make it a mainstream thinking process within the state system, perhaps it will deliver the results which you believe it should.
There is a related question. How can we support the awardee teachers to influence the larger ecosystem in a sustained manner and their own CPD, this process? Any thoughts?
I think it's, oh yeah, right. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, there are a few more questions. Just wanted to call your attention.
Okay, I'll quickly respond to that. You see, the point is that we somehow believe that we have reached a point where because I have been awarded, because I have been put on a pedestal, I need to be supported continuously. I form that special category of people. I am sorry if I have misunderstood that thought that this person has articulated, but that should not be the perspective. We have recognized a little streak in you of being an innovator, of being somebody who was questioning things, of being someone who went out of your way, was not tied down by the constraints that the system of placed before you, and you went about beating the system in some way. So even if, for instance, today you have grown out of that little itch that you had of holding the mouse, doing some little coding here, finding some new little solutions, and have grown into a larger thing. That in itself, if the system is allowing it, I think you should continue to. But the systems are so large, so dispersed, that it might not be possible for individuals of that kind to be continuously supported. But it is a well-taken idea. I believe if we have detected that there are these few people, few innovators in our system who dare to look differently, who are capable of looking at it differently, and who can make a meaningful impact in education, they should be nurtured, they should be supported, they should be, but I don't know now, and also because now I'm outside that system, I will not be able to, go ahead, and it will just become a preaching from my side saying that, the world should have been different, it should have been doing this and so on. So, but yes, they should be supported. Not so much in economic terms, not so much in being given more hardware and more software. That's not the way to look at those things. Their innovation should be mainstream. Their innovation should be encouraged. They should be catalyzed to do more than what they are presently doing.
Sangeeta, you have a question?
Sadakat, I hope you are watching the time. I am not looking at it.
Yes, Professor Ravi, as per the schedule.
Yeah, I was just going to repeat that. Ask Sangeeta ma'am to unmute and ask the question, or else she can type it if there's any problem with the speaking. Maybe you can go to Manjula ma'am's question, and then meanwhile Sangeeta ma'am can sort of get ready.
I'm not able to see Manjula's question.
No,
but I can
you'll have to request her to. There's no question on the chat. She can speak
okay,
and
okay. Yeah, Manjula, please go ahead. Oh, or in the meantime, we can take Ramanujan's question. You said there is little research on how ET can make teaching more effective. How relevant is all the international literature on this, Professor Rajaram?
Much of research that has come out in the field of particularly digital technologies are an artifact of the genre of technology that existed at those times. So if you are a keen watcher and if you put together all the researchers and find out the date, map it along with the date and put them on kind of a graph, you'll see there was a wave where there was multimedia being talked off, and then suddenly there were a whole lot of researchers on that. And now after a while there were online courses, and suddenly there was a wave on that. There isn't a consolidation of this research. On the one hand, we should be able to see, like I mentioned, the use of a blackboard through the use of a smart board, through the use of YouTube, through the use of something else, as one continuum of how audio-visual technologies can support teaching learning, and whether there is a progression of thought in that. Am I now in a better position to use these technologies than I was earlier? Not because the hardware and the software permit it, but because educational thought has improved or changed to accommodate these newer things. That kind of research I have not come across. The second thing that has happened parallelly, and there is this idea of visible learning that a group in Australia headed by John Hattie has come up with, where they have tried to see what are all those effects which influence children's learning. And technology being seen as one large thing. They have tried to combine all the meta-analysis that have been published, put together all this meta-analysis and done a meta-analysis of this. It is a statistical artifact, so I'm not really in a position to figure out whether that is a meaningful conclusion to draw. But what has emerged from that is technology has not made any meaningful impact. But then look at it this way. There was some research which was published in 1980, something in 2000, something in 2010, which are talking of different technologies, different ways of using it, different ways in which it was leveraged. So trying to combine all of these and then trying to say technology was not effective is unfair way of concluding. So there is this a mixed kind of information flowing out of research. So research should be looked at from the core questions they asked, the way they went about defining education, the way they tried to push in technology devices into that, and whether at all this would have worked. The other such research, large-scale compilation of things was what the PISA people did. And the PISA people figured out that in the OECD countries, across some 20 years, not much impact has been created by technology. But then very obviously, this is an artifact of the technologies that were available at some point. So when someone used that, the first generation Mac or the first generation PC and tried to do something with it, they would obviously have been limited with it. At the same time, one must recognize that if I throw the education group onto technology and say, go and make the best use of it, they are ill-equipped for it. They are not software developers. They are not visualizers. They cannot create a software on their own. So they can at best adapt to an existing solution. And there isn't anybody else outside sitting there who's saying, I'm making these solutions for you. Which is not the same as mathematics or science, where some newer discovery, some newer way of thinking can easily be adapted into school education.
Yeah. Jan says, this could possibly set the agenda for research. Ambika, you had raised hand. Do you want to ask? Ambika, please go ahead.
I can see Ambika. Ambika, madam, can you just unmute and speak? You can just click on the microphone to unmute yourself. To click on the microphone on the bottom of your screen, you will unmute and then you can ask your question to Professor Rajaram Sharma.
Yeah, so in the meantime, shall we take a question from Alo? How can we equip our teacher educators in the space of pre-service and in-service to use technology? What kind of enabling conditions must be placed? Do we have any defined technology integration framework? Professor Rajaram.
If you see, the only way to look at the answer to that question would be to look at what the Americans have done, what the Australians have done, what the New Zealanders have done, and so on and so forth. And you will find that there are multiple such frameworks available, but they all react to the position that or the availability of technology at that point in time. A very good example is the sort of knee-jerk reaction that we made when COVID struck and we shut down schools. Suddenly we said online courses are the best way of dealing with it, or online education is something that can easily be transacted. And so therefore what happens is equipping a teacher towards this kind of a thing, even if I allow a group of experts to go about trying to create some kind of a framework, we will figure out that either it will be too general, and there are such frameworks. In fact, within the new education policy recommendations, you find something called NDEAR, which is supposed to be one such framework of how technology is going to respond to classrooms. But it will become so general that I will not be able to pick up a social studies teacher and say, use this framework to enrich your social studies classroom. So that is where we run the danger of having common frameworks. But suppose we don't do that. suppose I am adequately informed, adequately reflective of what my role as a teacher is, and what are the goals of learning that I want to promote and how I can promote, and then am allowed to explore technology on my own with the mouse in my hand, then perhaps I will start seeing subsets of the world of technology which can become more meaningful to me. And it is only through that process of experiencing various kinds of technology, rejecting some of them, accepting some of them, maybe reconfiguring some of them, which will allow this to happen. One of the bottlenecks for that would be that the schools may not allow that, because the school would be compelled to have a minimum set of hardware which has already been established in the place. So there will be one room called the computer lab, or there will be 4 classrooms with some smart board. And so therefore, irrespective of what I want to do, I'm going to be forced to take on that thing. But it's an involved question. Perhaps if there is a need for it, maybe in the second set, we will try and revisit this question of how a teacher can equip herself, whether it's a pre-service teacher or a person who has already started teaching, how this person can equip oneself to do more and more with technology infusion. I don't think we should wait for any frameworks or any prescriptions from anywhere.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajaram. Professor Ravi, shall we move to the next leg of the presentation?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for a very interesting discussion, Sadakat. And let's move to the next part, which I'm very curious to hear, since it's about some cautions about ET, educational technology, and so on. So let's move on, Professor Rajan.
Yeah, thank you. If you look at the history of how technology got infused into schools and classrooms, there wasn't any great wave of all teachers getting onto the street and demanding that we be provided a computer, for the simple reason that educational applications, whether they come out of the hardware configuration or whether they come out of a software configuration, was never reflecting what the teacher's core business in the classroom was all about. And hence, most times, someone pointed out that this could be a possible way of using it, and found some, connections between an existing practice and this new practice. For instance, the use of slideshows in the class. That I could very easily see on the blackboard, I had to rub things out, but here I could go to the next slide, and that next slide I could always come back and revisit it again and again. And I could very clearly make out a kind of an argument that, look, that is why a presentation slide is better than your blackboard. It allowed for color, it allowed for all kinds of other flexibilities, but these were bells and whistles. They were not really a significant change in the way we went about teaching. Now, what happens when we position technology in this manner is that we are always making assumptions that the teacher is in a position to use this technology. For instance, over the last 1 year or so, I have used the Zoom platform, I have used Google Meet, I have used Microsoft Teams, I have used WebEx, I have used Big Blue Button. And finally, what I concluded was the best way of doing things would be to pass on my slideshow, always in the form of a PDF, to the organizers and say, please play that for me. What have I done? I have figured out that each of these interfaces expects me to learn something new, interact with it differently. One works with Firefox better, one works as a mobile app better, one gives me better audio, one gives me more control, and so on and so forth. And I have to actually learn some 10 different ways of handling this technology. Now, the readiness for a teacher to say that because I am using technology, now I have to get onto this new learning curve and grapple with all of these things before I can get back to my job. That was teaching a little math or teaching a little language or teaching a little science. That becomes an important bottleneck in this entire process. And most teachers, even though they may not have consciously articulated it, are intimidated by technology. I would be. because I have that mental construct that I am going to go there in that next 40 minutes. I am going to deliver from this point to this point, and suddenly technology as an interface comes in the way. It could be going and clicking 4 or 5 different menu options before I get to a simple thing like drawing a line, or constructing a table, or putting something into a graph, or whatever, or even labeling something and so on. Of course, many teachers have adapted to this new context, but if you take that larger group of people who may not yet have got onto technology, and today you go ahead and equip them with technology, you may have to handle enabling them to become ready for the use of technology. This is one aspect. The second aspect is connected with what is it that I can do with it. For instance, when this PowerPoint presentations became the most popular way of doing things, it was forced down the gullet of science teachers, maths teachers, who perhaps saw some easy ways of leveraging that. But then it was also imposed onto that language teacher, for that matter, the Kannada teacher or the Hindi teacher or the Telugu teacher. And poor chap had to grapple with the keyboard, had to grapple with the font, had to grapple with, various other things. And 4 or 5 hours of trying to make that little text come out in the set of a bulleted point. I'm so very happy that I'm doing it in English, and the keyboards were always made in English. There aren't standard ways in which technology becomes easy enough for me to go and say, click on this button, everything is on, I'm trying to use it. Which is why, if you see the best of classrooms, teachers regressing back to the blackboard and saying it is much more convenient to use that. So this readiness is something that we will have to look at. The second aspect about the device is that at some point in time, I went and bought a device. It has a particular configuration. It can accommodate particular kinds of software. It can allow certain kinds of connections, and it can do certain things. That becomes the restricting factor. If I want to do something more with it, I will not be able to do it. I can't grow the scale of, it's very easy for us who are sitting outside to speak in terms of all you need to do is create a way of mapping your mobile screen to that larger television screen. And the school will have a 18-inch screen, and it still has those 40 children sitting in front of it. So the device becomes a bottleneck. And this is an issue which we as people who are in a way evangelizing technology will have to constantly grapple with. What is the best way in which I can abstract out the practices of this teacher, the living professional life of this teacher, and see how I can fit in newer technologies into it and make that teacher's life a little more easier to handle. Otherwise, she's going to run away from it. The next aspect is the significant lag in educational transformation. Pick up the NCERT textbook and you will figure out that 99% of the time it pretends that there is no such thing as digital technologies available. It will still say, go and pick up something from your kitchen and do this experiment and try and do this. It will never invoke it, because we are, as people who are involved in the planning and configuration of all of this, constantly aware that we have not provided access to everybody, meaningful access. So while I can go ahead and say, oh, all I need to do is go and enroll into an online course, it's not as easy as that. There are so many more systemic issues, but beyond the systemic issues, there is the technology issue itself. And therefore, there is a significant lag. So much so that the textbooks which are being made are not even accessible. What do I mean by that? Pick up any single textbook and try and run that through a DAISY software for the visually challenged. And you will find that suddenly it will encounter some images there which cannot be translated. A diagram there, that is easier. At least in the English book, there is only diagrams and maps or tables and things like that, which are in the format of an image. But in the language textbooks or textbooks which have been written in various other languages, you will find that small little tables, small little boxes which contained some significant information has been converted into an image and planted there. So the person who is making this textbook, the person who is designing this textbook and demanding it of that DTP operator to make a textbook, has not addressed this question that this is finally going to be made accessible through a technology medium, and it should be accessible to that visually challenged person also, or whoever else. So there is this lag. There is this lag in thinking about how education technology can transform. And the higher you go within the education system beyond the teacher, most of the people there are not people who are very conversant with the possibilities of technology, or nor are very eager to try and see how I can enrich the educational material that I'm bringing in through this. I'm not even getting into this big issue of how examinations drive educational reform, but then that again is technologically enabled only in terms of online applications or marks card and mark sheets becoming available, but examinations have not been influenced by technological reform. Far more important, within the classroom, there is the danger that education will become a casualty. And when we say education, we are not looking at information transfer. We are not looking at teaching only. We are looking at learning. We are looking at what will happen to the child as a consequence of receiving this information. What more experiences can I expose that child to? What demands can I make on that child to process that information and create knowledge? What newer applications shall I make that child to try and demonstrate or do so that I have evidences of learning and I can encourage a broader learning, and through that process make that child more competent in language, more competent in mathematization, more competent in various other skills and habits which are required for learning, just plain studying. And I somehow believe that particular ways in which technology has got introduced, this could be an artifact of our historical context. Maybe there are better ways of looking at it, but presently those two predominant models that we have, which I have alluded to in the report also, one is that I take the classroom and make the teacher capable of using some device. The other is to create a lab in which children will go once in a while and sit in front of a computer. Both of these are not delivering, and they are not delivering not so much in terms of what they can do, but in terms of educationally enriching this process. The teacher is not becoming better, the student is not becoming better as a consequence of that. And now it is also adding another layer where individual children are being encouraged to handle equipment. Newer people are getting exposed to technologies which are far, far more complex than what we can imagine. A single OTP, a single mobile message can ruin not only my computer, but also my privacy, my identity. And trying to say that, preschool children, middle school children, primary school children are going to be suddenly now being educated into all of these and make them into very informed users of technology is too big a challenge that we have not equipped ourselves for. There was this luxury of trying to gradually introduce things earlier, but there is this runaway technology which is going to allow children to start wielding it. To the extent that there is this child who's going to throw a tantrum and not eat till she is allowed to see a YouTube cartoon, I have lesser problems. Though that is also a problemsome situation, that is less of a problem. If you take the number of cases where gaming, or for that matter, online betting, or for that matter, various kinds of hacking and so on, have started interfering with the ways younger children are using or being exposed to technology, we must be very, very wary of trying to impose any particular technological solutions into the classroom. Or at least some of us who are better informed about this should engage far more deeply with all these possible ways in which technology, rather than supporting education, can come in the way of education. Technology, rather than supporting individuals to become more efficient and effective, can actually come in the way of their growth and development. And this is that danger that I was trying to sort of flag here. Can I go to the next slide, please? So now the larger question of how shall we make it happen? Who is this we? And as I have argued out in this, there are individuals, teachers and students who have to do things on their own. But here I am looking at this larger environment of people who are the outsiders mainly, to try and see how we can support and help in this transformation of making technology accessible, of making technology meaningful, appropriate, to the needs of schools and classrooms, and ensuring that they deliver. Apart from the fact that the current is going to go off or the internet connectivity is not going to be good enough, I'm not really getting into those nitty-gritties. They will always remain a kind of a problem. There are workarounds for some of them. Some of them simply don't have workarounds, and therefore I would discourage very global solutions of someone sitting in Delhi now and saying that everybody in this country is going to be benefited by technology. I mean, I can now have the luxury of saying that I don't want to be trying to preach such solution. But then that's not the context here. The context is some of us outsiders who have been grappling with technology, who have created training interfaces where we can reach out to teachers, some of us who are part of self-help groups of teachers, some of us who are involved in curriculum development, some of us who are involved in assisting the state systems in looking at education from different perspectives. What is it that we should do for making this ET possibilities accessible and usable within the system? So the first issue that I raised throughout my talk was about what should be this ET environment. Should it be a computer connected to a projector, or are there different ways? When we say, okay, that is not possible, you'll go ahead and say today television is a better way of looking at it, or one device replacing another device. So rather than getting into this device-centric argument about this whole thing, we should get into an education-centric argument about this and try to see what is that model of the education technology environment that I want to create, which will allow me to shift the emphasis to education. Transforming education is not trying to bring in a device, but to see if that device can actually deliver on the kinds of changes that I want to make in that classroom. So that is, there aren't enough tried and tested models of that, and I believe that all of us should try and see how we can work towards that. Shifting this emphasis to transforming education itself is a big call. When NCF 2005 came in, many of us jumped onto it and said, here is that finally the beacon, the light that is going to change things. But it did not happen. It did not happen because there was a way in which such changes are to be seeped into this system. Everybody made aware of, sensitized to the possibilities, and to reflect upon the possibilities, try to make smaller changes in that. So helping shift the emphasis is not something that can be achieved through one more circular, one more policy document, one more change in some process in the classroom. We will have to constantly endeavor. So it might mean transformed teacher education curriculum. It might mean transformed textbooks. It might mean transformed examinations. It could mean different kinds of hardware and software becoming accessible. It might mean intervening or supporting companies which are putting in their time and effort in creating various kinds of software solutions or content, and trying to help them understand how education should be transformed and why a particular way of packaging multimedia is not the most appropriate way of doing it. So we need to be looking at it from that perspective. And this will also help us include that wider range of possibilities. For instance, today, you will notice that we do not have enough number of interactive packages which can help improve the way we do science or math in the classroom. Those softwares are not a part of the reckoning of people who typically talk of education technology. The classic example is that within the Office suite, the most underused software is the spreadsheet, simply because it could appear to be far more complex. And that's not the only reason why that should be dissuaded, but there is no meaningful way somebody has suggested or drawn up a sequence of ways in which the 3rd standard child can use it, the 5th standard child can use it, the 8th standard child can use it, and so on. So if we were able to transform our textbooks that way, if we were able to transform teacher materials that way, if we were able to bring in technology into the classroom in that manner, perhaps there will be a wider range of possibilities, wider range of uses within the classroom. Graphic software, for instance, is very grossly underutilized in the classrooms, and it is very essential that we start doing things which allow children to create things in this class. We allow teachers to create things out of it. So most of the times we are also obsessed with the deficiencies of the education system, the limitations of the education system, the lack of access, and somehow all of us have our own favorite theories of how efficient the education system is, and we are willing to brand a large number of people as uncreative, unproductive people who need to be supplied material. So this will also come in the way of thinking about education technology. And finally, I don't believe we have generated a system whereby teachers and students are making choices. First of all, leave alone an informed choice, but even making choices. Schools are thrusting down technologies onto them because it has been defined that way. State systems, when they get involved, they try to magnify that problem by making it a statewide prescription of that kind, or the hardware itself becomes that little defining way in which only particular applications. So there is this teacher who says, I want to use this particular app, or I want to use this particular thing. Now, if that app is available only on the iOS platform, it's not available on the Android platform, it comes in the way. So enabling teachers and students to, first of all, exercise their choice, and then to inform themselves of why that choice should be made, how it should be made, why it should not be made, or what are the dangers of making particular choices. This itself requires us to get far more involved with this whole process of debating how technology should be pushed into the classroom. If at all it should be pushed in the first place. And if it is being pushed in, is the classroom the only interface where such a thing should happen? Is there something in the school which is outside the classroom where meaningful use of technology can be made for driving a lot more other objectives which are not possible within the classroom? Can, for instance, providing technology at home be looked at differently apart from providing them tutorials or preparing them for some fancy examination? If we can look at such things and then encourage the whole system of generation of such ideas to inform teachers, students, the people who govern these education systems, and people who are interested in the welfare of children and teachers, I think we would do a very, we will be able to help the system look at technology, and we should leave it to the individual user then to say that I'm not convinced. I don't know whether it will work. Or at least currently the set of practices that I have which are proven to be effective are not going to be significantly changed by the introduction of particular technologies. Yeah, can I go to the next slide? I know we will never be able to meaningfully conclude on such issues simply because they are far more complex, and I have tried to sort of veer myself completely away from talking of technology. Simply because there is enough and plenty discourse on this issue, and also a small talk of this kind will get completely distracted when we get into very individual examples of software, hardware, devices, configuration, environment, the kind of problems that we have in infusing technology. So I've tried to give you a conceptual background on this whole thing of how I would have liked to look at technology if I were the decision maker on this issue. And I hope many of you will be in a position to at least use this line of thinking to address your own issues connected with this, and come out with some ways in which meaningfully we can further the transformation of education. And if technology does not do that, I wouldn't be unhappy at all. I would simply go ahead and throw that out, saying that here is one bad example of what it ought to have done. So therefore, perfectly all right with me. This is an evolution. There will be newer technologies which will come and replace that. But having a keen eye to look at what are those newer technologies coming in, what can they do for us, things like artificial intelligence, things like data, large data, things like, alternate universes, things like the multimedia revolutions that are happening, constantly looking at the fringe, the newer, edges of technological evolution, and seeing how we can bring them into meaningful uses into schooling, I think is an important goal, and all of us should try and push ourselves towards that. In case some of you would like to continue this conversation with me, I have my mail ID listed here. You can always write to me. Thank you very much.
Professor Ravi, may I take it forward?
Yeah, please go ahead, Sadakat. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajaram. We have drawn our attention to moving away from the technocentric, device-centric models and having a more education-centric model. But often when we talk about models, again, you have also brought out the point that there is definite paucity of good models of meaningful engagement with technology. But when we talk of models, and often we encounter this challenge of scalability and sustainability. Okay, you might have tried some model, maybe in 50 schools or maybe 100 schools, but we have hundreds, thousands of schools. So how do we scale a model and how do we make it sustainable?
You know, one of the major investments vis-a-vis these new digital technologies is that device itself. And there is only that much amount of money available in the system for us to. So if you say scale, if I even define, let us say, for instance, I want an internet connection to be available on tap in every classroom of the country. Let us say that is my goal. There are a number of technological possibilities. If you ask the engineer to tell you what are the 5-6 different ways in which this can be achieved, starting from that simple wired broadband kind of thing through a mobile connectivity, through even going and asking Elon Musk to drop in a satellite connection into my school, there is a range of possible ways in which this connection can be established. But that connection has to flow through a device. And that device for it, if there is one single device through which it is flowing, then that device should be large enough for all children to consume. And it should not just be a consuming device, it should be a producing device. So if once I start growing my model itself, the model becomes unwieldy. The model becomes far more complex, and we opt for simpler ways of looking at it and say, let me just, to begin with, give them 4 PCs. Okay, no, this is not, perhaps that is exactly why we need to sort of, stay out of that school system for a while and think in terms of, okay, what can be meaningful applications of education technology here, and draw up those little contours and then say, given 2022's availability of hardware, software, various kinds of applications, what is the best mix and match that I can think of? Till such time that we come out with this kind of a prescription, there will always be evangelists who have a little money, who are willing to push in that thing, and who will go ahead and give them one large television screen, who will give them, one DTH connection, who will give them one, hard disk full of video programs and so on. So that is what I meant by ill-informed choices. See, these are not education centric, and therefore, when we talk of scaling, we will run into these bottlenecks. Education technology, if it is not defined from education up, have we not scaled schools? Have we not scaled classrooms? Have we not scaled 8th standard science and math? We have managed to reach it out to every school. Now, that is the kind of perspective from which we should also look at the possibilities of technology and say, if I'm able to abstract out 5, 6, 10 different ways in which I want technology to support education, I should ask myself, is that feasible at all? Is there one kind of device, one kind of software application, one kind? I'm not really specifically talking of a particular type of particular hardware. So let us not get into whether a television is better than a projector and so on. So there will be an evolution. Something else will come in. But the principle is that I want everybody to see. I want everybody to be able to interact with it. I want everybody to have adequate amount of time to work with it. And there we are negotiating forever. So, when we first set up this ICT curriculum also, it was preceded by the national policy of ICT in school education. And there we said, to begin with, let us at least have, a ratio of 1:10 or 1:15 in the school. That is, every 15 children having access to one computer, so that over a period of 1 week, I can provide for 3-4 periods where they are going to go and access it. But slowly, it has to grow to a point where it is 1:1. And if I even manage to grow it to 1:1 today with some kind of a big grant, classroom processes are going to come in the way. My classrooms are designed such that those 40 children are going to be locked up into a room at a given point in time. They cannot have the freedom of choosing what they want to study or what they want to learn or which activity they want to do. Even the teachers' hands are tied there. So I think we are prematurely looking at the possibility of scaling, but good demonstrations of various such models, if they are culled, if they are put together, if they can form a meaningful whole over a period of time, if there is a concerted effort to collect all the research insights that come out of this into a growing thought about what technology can do, I think it will serve its purpose sometime or the other. Until such time, let everybody do this experimentation.
Thank you. Ambika has raised hand. Last time also she had raised. Ambika, could you unmute yourself and ask?
Currently, Ambika is not in the room, so she's dropped off, I think.
No, I can see her name. It says she's connected from a mobile. If she can't unmute, then perhaps she can type it in the chat.
I can also see it.
We can move on perhaps to the next question.
Right. So everybody, please feel free to type in question and raise your hand. Professor Rajaram, in the report, it's also noted that the participation, and you also pointed out in the talk that we need more and more participation of wider education community in the design and in the edtech, in the larger ecosystem of edtech. But particularly in the report, you have mentioned that in the design and development of products, we need more participation. So far, the community's participation has been largely as a passive consumer. But thinking from a practical standpoint, because edtech integration is somehow is led by the device-centric models, and the devices are produced by companies. So, how do you see the practical participation of community in the design of products?
Okay. See, let us look at software from the following perspective. You have this software, which, for instance, I took the example of a spreadsheet or a graphic software. These are containers. These give you the canvas, they give you some bells and whistles, they give you some features, functions, whatever, but you can go about doing what you want with it. And hence, if I can concentrate only on this kind of a software, an online course platform, for instance, is exactly this kind of a software. A blog site is an exactly of this kind, where I do not have to interface with technology. There is already somebody who has put together that larger. It's like the highway which has already been laid out, and all I need to do is have a little car which can go on that road. Okay, given the constraints, given the restrictions of that system. So today, if you ask yourself, how many teacher educators are ready to go about creating an online course? What are the ways in which online courses can be created? What skills, what competencies are required for creation and curation and evaluation of online courses? We have not focused on these. The teaching community today, even if it is going to be given a platform, which I think is the easiest way of handling it, will not be in a position to jump onto this and say, okay, I can use this to scale up things. Right?
Why is that?
For instance, let us say that we say that we want to create a course, an online course. The effort that is required in thinking through the educational model of this online course It exists. It exists where? In research, or it exists in corporates. It exists, amongst the group of people who are doing such things. But now that I have had the opportunity of experiencing online reaching out to children, I won't call it an online course, what we did during the COVID, can I now think in terms of making it a kind of a standard model in its broadest sense of it, of how I should be able to use technology A, B, C, D in a manner in which it can most effectively reach out to a child at home? And can I ensure that every teacher educator has acquired this know-how of debating and thinking it through? Whether that teacher is an art teacher or a music teacher or a sports teacher or a maths teacher, is there ways in which I have worked out that the equivalent of what I was doing in the classroom can now be done through technology in the following manner? So the hardware or the software need not be the constraint. Okay, I will not become an app developer. I will soon bump into some possibility that this particular software does not allow, but then I'm not wedded to that software. I'll go ahead and download some other software which can do. Some of us on our own are starting to do this. A large number of us are experimenters with, every other day we'll be installing some new app or some new software and trying out some new things that we couldn't do. Right. Now, for instance, the graphic that I've used as the background for this is something which some other artist has made, but it's not something that I can do. Right. So what did I do? I use the easier way of, stealing it from, from the web. Now, at least to that extent, if all of us become regular users of technology, we will bump into various issues, problems that this technology provides, and we will have learnt a way of negotiating it. So therefore, today, if the state government decides that we will provide this online course platform, we will not be able to use it, because the larger number of people who are the trainers, who are the people who are going to be the course developers, who are the course curators, who are the course managers of various kind, who are the ones who are going to evaluate things, where are those evaluation banks that we are going to use for evaluation? Isn't it? So that is one way in which all of us can jump onto the bandwagon right away. And it requires a minimum interface with technology. We don't really need to becoming masters of any coding or any, programming.
Thank you very much. You did, I'd again request if anybody has questions, you can raise hand or type in. But I had one last question. You did mention about, towards the end of the talk, the need to explore more on the new and emerging technologies such as AI, XR, ML, etc., etc. So what are your thoughts, or how do you see these technologies, particularly since they also seem to promise to help overcome the learning disabilities and in the form of assistive technologies? But at the same time, we also keep hearing about the dangers and the digital itself is posing us in terms of data, privacy, surveillance, identity, etc., etc. How should we keep hearing about it in the news? So how should a researcher, a novice researcher, or maybe a teacher should tread this path of exploration and experimenting with technology?
Okay, so when we say there is somebody called a researcher, let us preclude that group of people who are getting their MPhil thesis or their PhD thesis out of this. For the simple reason that their compulsions at this point in time is going to narrow down their way of looking at a problem. They have to solve a problem, they have to get themselves a degree. There isn't a larger culture of people, academics in this country, who are lifelong researchers of whatever. There are groups of people. It's not that it's zero. But certainly the larger group of academics are teachers. They are not people who are researchers of any given domain. We need to cultivate that possibility that if I am a biologist, I am constantly looking at how technology can further not just biology, but biology education. And if we come to the teacher educator group, it is a little more removed, that their interface with the forefront of knowledge, either in the domain or in technology, is going to be very meager. So what happens at the end of this whole process is that I hear second hand, third hand of the possibilities of artificial intelligence or data analytics or whatever. So to me, the nearest thing that I can think of is that, I have an Alexa box at home and I'm asking stupid questions and it's giving me stupid answers. So while yes, it has degenerated itself to a toy, there is immense technology behind that whole thing. I very naturally use the Google map to navigate around. I mean, I rarely think in terms of that. For some of us who have been using the Google search engine over the last 30 years, we'll discover that we could easily play the game of, trying to say, Google, you don't know this answer. And I could type in a question very clearly and say that, look, now Google is not going to give me this answer. But it's becoming better and better and better and better. Now, what is it that is driving that bettering of this technology at the back of it? Now, that curiosity, that interest, that exploration of these technologies is certainly going to be a very important way in which education, people in education can become capable of demanding particular applications and technology. Today, they simply do not have the means to demand something. So they will always try to succumb to, somebody told us that there is this application, we downloaded it, we started using it. Okay, so you think of any application today, they were not made for education. Very, very few applications here and there which were made for education, which are stuck in time. And there isn't a constant progression of saying that, okay, fine, now that I have this math software, shall I also make a geography software out of this? Shall I also make some other software out of it? Even for that matter, you think in terms of a little set of macros. Maybe if I search deeply enough on the web, I will find a set of macros there. But even if they were pushed into my spreadsheet, it might be possible for me to do better English teaching or better political science teaching using graphs and data and numbers and so on. So I'm only saying how we, all of us, can sort of at least become literate enough to be in a position to foresee some of the possibilities that technological trends are showing, and then equip ourselves to make those demands. And if researchers can help, that will be a great thing, because teachers do not have the bandwidth. Teachers in general do not have the bandwidth to ask for newer applications, newer software, and so
on. Thank you very much, Professor Rajaram Sharma, for a very engaging discussion, the talk followed by it, and answering to as many questions we had. I had seen one hand, but I forgotten the name of the person. Maybe the person got dropped off. Hemanti,
I think that was Hemanti Bishwas, but she cannot speak because she's connected in listen-only mode. Right. Hemanti ji, if you would like to speak, you'll have to click on the headphone icon and connect using the microphone. Okay, I think Aarti Yadav was also raised hand. So, Aarti ji, would you like to ask your question? Sadakat, I hope that's okay.
Yes, yes.
Good evening, Professor Rajaram.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening. Yeah.
I have been listening to you since you started speaking, and I would say that, as a student of educational technology, and I teach that as a subject in a B.Ed course and M.Ed course as well. So it was a very engaging conversation today. And, I myself have gained so many insights, how I can take the discussions forward in my classroom. Then I'll be discussing about the various ICT uses. Besides that, we also teach, the various models of learning, etc. in the course. But this conversation is really engaging, and has given me insights into how to carry the research forward. So my question is that during the entire discussion, we can see it is the teacher who can make the effective use of technology. And when in Haryana, I see that the government has handed over the phone tablets to the students and the teachers of the government schools. So how justified such investments are on such a large scale to promote the use of technology in schools? How can this, take forward the excellence in education?
Okay. I don't know whether that's a complaint from your side, because you start saying how justified is this, but then let's presume that it's a very positive move. See, the larger number of children do not have access to direct connectivity of any kind. So if someone is going to be given a connection, someone is essentially being told, open this window, go look outside. There is a much larger world out there. Right? And that, I believe, is a great goal. That it comes out of public money, that it does not have scale, that it is getting locked up into particular devices is an issue which we have debated long enough. But let's look at what is it that we can do if there are larger and larger number of children with access to the device. Amongst the first things that I would do is, I would say, I will stop explaining or describing the textbook to you in the classroom. Go ahead and do it yourself. This possibility itself opens out. If I can set a set of exercises to children for exploring the world on their own against any given topic that you are teaching, it opens out the possibility of children accessing a large amount of information. You will get to know how many of them can meaningfully access, how many of them will find it difficult. You will be able to train them in that. Today, you don't even have that kind of a diagnostics with you, because you make an assumption that you have the device, the children don't have the device. This is one way of equipping teachers. So if you were to try and, let us say, do a little action research of this kind within your teacher education class, I would suggest this off-the-cuff idea. Let us say that you start with the assumption that every one of my children have access to a device all the time, and it is available to them for doing whatever it is that they want to do with no restrictions. Now you say, okay, fine, I am a math teacher, I am a science teacher, I am a language teacher, I am a history teacher. What is it that I can do with this? It will automatically open out possibilities which you had otherwise removed from your wish list, because you said, but then children don't have access to it, but then children can't do this experiment, but then children don't have this information, and so on. So I believe in that sense of it, whether it's public money or whether it is private money or whether it is X way of doing it or Y way of doing it, if everybody gets access, there is a possibility of imagining education differently. But from a researcher's point of view, it also opens out the possibility that you can start looking at these children and figuring out what is it that they are trying to do on their own, how can we help them do much better, what will stop them from doing things, or what are the dangers that they're going to run into. These things have not been adequately researched. If suppose a 20-year-old is given a device today, what is it that the child will do with it? If a 7-year-old child is given a device, what is it that the child will do with it? If someone who has particular interests in particular subjects or is talented, let us say you have someone who's musically endowed and you want that child to start exploring music using this, what is it that the child can do? We don't even have such prescriptions or such ideas, such little stories which tell us what is it that a teacher should do with a group of people who now have access. Okay, so I think that will set you off on thinking on these lines. I don't think I'll be able to add more answers. We can continue this conversation this way. But then that line of thinking is what I would do, that yes, children have access and therefore let me think of it differently.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you very much once again, Professor Rajaram Sharma. Now I hand over it to Professor Ravi, chair of today's webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Sadakat, and for leading the discussion. And I think it was a very engaging presentation and discussion. And in all the responses, I think the messages are coming through clearly. And I'd like to begin with one of the important things that you said, which is the need for research not to just rush into implementing technologies or doing something with it, but also to stand back and reflect and study what possibilities exist, what constraints and what difficulties arise, and so on. So I'd like to call your attention to those avenues for doing research. If you're interested in getting involved, please look at the chat where there are several links. Firstly, I encourage you to become members of the CESI, the Comparative Education Society of India, which is going to have a conference soon. I think in early December. The dates are there on the website. And you can become members of CESI and participate in the conference. That's the first thing. The second thing is to also join the special group, which is the Research Interest Group on Education and Technology. And the links are there in the chat as well. So please do join. There's also a Telegram group which you can join. Telegram is a chat software that you can download and use. It's very flexible, better than WhatsApp in many ways. So the link to do that is also there. There is a link to the webinar page where I assume that the recording of the session will be available and other resources such as these links. So please do click on that as well. Let me also take this opportunity to thank IT for Change for organizing this seminar and all the collaborating agencies which with IT for Change. That's wonderful. I'd just like to point to a few takeaways from the talk. I think one of the main messages is that it's important for technology to be hands-on. Teachers need to use the technology. So I think the important message is to start from use. So let the teachers use it in ways which make their work easier, more effective, more interesting perhaps. So start from use. So that leads to some kind of immersion in technology, and thereby teachers can become free to explore and find creative ways in which the technology itself can be used. And the same thing, so let the teachers use technology in their work. And when you take this to the students, of course, it becomes let the students use this technology in their play, which is the term which educationists use for the way students, the way in which we can ensure student engagement, which is play, having leisure activities. I think this kind of immersion and starting from use is important in what Professor Rajaram pointed out. And he said that, of course, not having devices is a big constraint. So, get the devices in or start with the devices which are present in the environment and see how one can use them. I would also, something that occurred to me is that start with applications already being used, perhaps something like Google Maps or something like chat applications, and see how we can bring that into education and what educational possibilities exist in the use itself. Maybe that's something for to be researched. And I think one of the important things is that the tendency to use this the new technology in old ways, just substituting a lecture using a PowerPoint and so on, which math education researcher Marcelo Borba from Brazil has called domestication. So you domesticate a new technology by sort of using it in the way in which you use the old technology, such as the blackboard. Perhaps that's an unavoidable starting point, but it's important to go beyond that. So I think there are many takeaways and important messages, and do revisit the website for these resources, including this session. And there are going to be a series of other webinars on educational technology. Please keep a watch out for them and do participate. Again, I'd point to the links in the chat to the Research Interest Group, the CESI conference, and the Telegram groups, which you can join up. I'll also request you all to fill up the feedback form for this webinar. This will help the organizers in tuning the webinars better to your interests. The link to the feedback form is also there in the chat. So please do fill up the form. Guru, if I've missed out anything, please step in and you can add, I think.
Nothing from me, Ravi. Only thing that there is a webinar page. So since there are so many links, it might be confusing. So for everybody, the primary link that you need to remember is the webinar page link, which I just put in the chat. And we'll make sure that every other link is available to that. And of course, feedback. Feedback, you can just click before you exit this room. If you can click and give your feedback, that'd be very valuable for us to do, to continue this series subsequently. That's all, Ravi, from me.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Rajaram, once again, Sadakat, and thank you, Guru, for organizing this very interesting session. And I look forward to more things in the future. Thanks, everyone, for your participation, for your asking questions. Let's hope the technology allows us to have more interaction next time. Yeah. Sadakat, you would like to say something?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Rajaram. Maybe you can, yeah, I'm glad you put your video on. Thank you so much. I'll request everybody, before you exit, please click on the feedback link and share your feedback. That also gives us your contact information so we know how we can be in touch with you. And please do join the Telegram groups that Ravi mentioned, as well as the SESI Research Interest Group on Education and Technology. We look forward to your joining that group as well. Thank you.
So we can leave at this point?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so. Thank you so much, Rajaram. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Sadakat. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you all again in the next webinar, which we will organize shortly.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, then. Have a good day.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.